BG Jackie, Behis or BH, Ruspi, Ron Urdan, Certified Original May Meet Channel Worldwide, 90 Nations Explore, with XTS Transient Broadcasting globally, Elite Core, Ruspi, Ron Urdan. Thank you very much to all the ardent followers and subscribers of my channel. Since then, guys, Tasha Kor, Danke, mercy to all of you.
Welcome to your Essential Business Briefing. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, what should we expect from the global economy in 2020? We'll crunch the latest figures from the World Bank and sort the good news from the bad. The price of chocolate could be about to soar as producers prepare to impose a massive levy on their cocoa. And why new food labelling rules mean French shoppers might find it harder to buy organic tomatoes this winter. First up, though, the latest economic forecast from the World Bank paints a mixed picture for the year ahead. The bank says that global growth will speed up in 2020, but remain relatively weak at a rate of 2.5%. The bad news is for advanced economies, where the likes of the United States and the Eurozone will see their growth slow down this year, while emerging and developing countries will see an improvement. But for all major economies, the picture is more gloomy than the World Bank's last forecast in 2019. One of the lead authors of that report is Francisca Onsorga from the World Bank, and she joins us now from London. Francisca, thanks for being with us. I'm going to start by asking you, with the events of the recent days in the Middle East, I'm wondering how an escalation of these tensions might actually affect the economy in that region over the coming year.
You know, the geopolitical issues have been a risk to global growth for a while now. And they continue to be a risk, and these events are just a reminder that geopolitical risks continue to be a downside scenario to global growth. As it is, we expect a very fragile global recovery in 2020, and any number of risks can derail that.
Well, looking at the more broad picture then, should we consider 2020 to be a better year, a more optimistic year than 2019?
Somewhat better. So 2019 was an exceptional year. Global growth reached a post-crisis low of 2.4%. Emerging market and developing economy growth reached a post-crisis low of 3.5%. In the last couple of months, we have seen signs of stabilization. Business surveys have improved a bit. Some of the export numbers that have recently come out are a bit better. There is some signs that the trade tensions are easing. So we do expect a stabilization in 2020, but that is a pickup, an inching up of global growth from 2.4% in 2019 to 2.5% in 2020. And even that is a very fragile recovery. It essentially rests on a rebound in emerging market growth to 4.1%. And that in turn is itself driven by really strong rebounds in 8 emerging markets and developing economies that are coming out of a very difficult 2019. So there are big downside risks to this global growth outlook.
So what sort of things should we be worried about then in the coming year? Is US-China trade tensions still a bigger concern this year as it was last year?
So there are a number of downside risks to a global economy. One of them is that trade and tensions escalate again, and that will set back global trade again. Last year was really the year with the weakest global trade growth, less than 1.5% by our estimate. So we do expect a pickup, but that can be derailed if trade tensions intensify yet again in 2020. Another risk is the risk of financial market disruptions. Yes, it does look like global interest rates will remain low for a long time, and that's what markets expect at the moment. But there's always the possibility that suddenly there's a turn in investor sentiment, risk aversion rises, and financing costs go up. Another risk is that there's a growth slowdown in the major economies. like the US or the euro area or China, a sharper than expected slowdown in these economies would be felt in emerging markets and developing economies. And finally, there are, of course, the geopolitical tensions. If they are sustained, if they accelerate, intensify, then yes, that is a risk to global growth. I should mention that there is also one upside risk to global growth. It does look like currently there is a stabilization that could just possibly turn into a sustained upturn, a broad-based upturn, simply because the manufacturing cycle turns and there's no new shock to the global economy. So we'll have to see whether one day of sunshine makes a summer, but there is a possibility that global growth picks up in this broad-based, synchronized upturn.
I appreciate you finding the upside and the bright spot in these figures for us as well. Staying with that theme then, looking at the emerging markets or emerging economies that are doing well, what's driving their growth?
Well, actually, a number of emerging markets and developing economies are still growing robustly despite this weak external environment. So, for example, on average, if you just count the number of emerging markets and developing economies that are growing by more than 5%, that's 1/4 of emerging markets and developing economies. A lot of them are agricultural commodity exporters in Africa. Some of them, even India, where growth has slowed sharply last year, we're expecting a pickup from 5% last year to 5.8% this year. As some of these financial markets stresses, financial system stresses in the non-bank financial system are unwound in 2020 and investment begins to pick up again. So a lot of emerging markets, 1/4 of them, are still growing at robust rates. It's just that their growth is not accelerating much in a lot of them.
We did have a lot of warnings in 2019 about the risk of recession in certain economies. We thought Germany was going to go into a recession at one stage. We thought the UK was going to go into recession at another. Will we hear, do you think, plenty more of those warnings this year?
Well, the baseline forecast is, of course, not for a recession. We expect global growth to pick up. The other thing to bear in mind is that global recessions, at least, not just in individual countries, but global recessions, really disruptive events where per capita growth goes negative, those are very rare. We've only had 4 of them since 1950 in the global economy. Mind you, with global growth slowing to something like 2.5%, perhaps 3% in the outer years, a big shock is much more likely to derail the global economy than when you start from a higher level of growth like you had on the order of 3% in 2018 or 17.
OK, something to keep an eye on anyway in the months ahead. Franziska Unsorger from the World Bank, thank you very much for speaking to us. Now, is the price of chocolate about to jump? A deal agreed between 2 of the world's top cocoa-producing countries could see the commodity get much more expensive later this year. Industry experts say it could be the biggest overhaul of the cocoa industry in decades. Well, to explain what this means for anyone with a sweet tooth, Kate Moody has the details. Kate.
Well, Stephen, it's being described as an OPEC for chocolate. As of October, Ivory Coast and Ghana will charge a $400 premium on the price of each ton of cocoa exported. That means that if the price on international commodities markets is, for example, $2,500 per ton, it will be sold for $2,900 instead. Rather than going directly to farmers, that extra money will be put aside in a rainy day fund to be distributed as needed if prices drop drastically. The so-called living income differential could have a real impact because Ivory Coast and Ghana produce nearly 2/3 of the world's cocoa. It could set a precedent for other exporting countries. Nigeria is considering its own price premium, while Peru has suggested setting a minimum price for cocoa sales. The idea is to help struggling farmers. Cocoa producers pocket less than 7% of the final cost of their raw material, and those who process and grind the pods about the same. The lion's share goes to manufacturers and retailers who sell the final product. The World Bank says that 80% of cocoa farmers earn less than $3 per day. That's 4 million people and their families around the world. For the chocolate industry, addressing that poverty has become increasingly important as it faces calls to ensure a sustainable supply chain. Major brands like Mars and Hershey have signed on to the cocoa cartel, in part to improve their reputation and secure their future. The global chocolate industry is worth over $100 billion. While manufacturers may swallow higher costs in the short term, analysts say it will ultimately be chocolate-loving consumers who pick up that tab. Stephen?
Kate, thank you very much for that. Well, staying with all things food, and new labelling rules for organic produce here in France. Since the 1st of January, fruit and vegetables grown in greenhouses out of their usual seasons cannot be labelled as organic. It's in an effort to reduce the emissions from food production here, but farmers fear it will put them at a disadvantage. Brian Quinn reports.
At France's markets this winter, no sign of French-grown eggplants, tomatoes or cucumbers labeled Agriculture Biologique, the label that officially designates organically grown produce. From December through April, French organic farmers are forbidden from selling produce grown in heated greenhouses under the label. This farmer approves.
Is it really necessary here, with everything that we have in winter, because it's a lot, to also produce vegetables that are meant for the summer?
The new restriction has grown out of a long debate over the future of organic food in France. Traditional producers say heated greenhouses are part of an effort by large interests to industrialize organic farming, contrary to the original spirit of the practice. They point in particular to the method's carbon footprint. A kilo of tomatoes grown in a heated greenhouse is responsible for 2.2 kilograms of CO2 emissions and 7 times the amount of greenhouse gases overall than a kilo grown outside in the summer. Pro-greenhouse groups, though, point to the ever-growing demand for organic products and warn of market distortions. Today, 78% of the tomatoes, 70% of cucumbers, and 69% of zucchinis sold in France come from abroad. They say the new measure only serves to help the competition in neighboring countries.
It establishes that the rest of Europe will continue to use heated greenhouses, while we in France will once again have harder conditions. And it absolutely won't prevent vendors like big supermarkets from sourcing products elsewhere.
It's not a total ban. French organic producers can still use their greenhouses, they just can't sell summer vegetables in winter. France's agriculture ministry says it's hoping the EU as a whole will settle the issue when it revises its organic farming rules in 2021.
Well, that's it from us for this week, but you can listen back to this and previous episodes of People in Profit as a podcast on Spotify, Apple and Stitcher. And you can get in touch with us on Facebook at France24 Business and tweet me with your comments at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.
France 24, c'est la richesse de la diversité culturelle mondiale avec un réseau de correspondants à travers la planète.
En France 24 en español comunicamos a Latinoamérica con el mundo entero.
روح مهنية شعارها واحد حرية التعبير. هذه هي بصمة France 24.
Africa on France 24 is about its people and their stories.
Los ciudadanos nos cuentan cuáles son las iniciativas y las problemáticas que tienen en sus comunidades a través del programa Los Observadores. Eso los acerca aún más a France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.